From your experience running your company, has there been a day that you felt, I can't do this anymore?
More than one day.
Tell me about it.
Meet Ross McCulloch, the founder of Third Sector Lab and a driving force behind helping charities, social entrepreneurs, and community groups unlock the real power of digital and design. From SCVO and Catalyst to Myeloma UK, Oxfam Scotland, and NHS GGC, Ross works with the organisations that make real impact happen every day.
There are some people who think that some charities just take the money to pay their staff. They don't get to really do anything. A large portion of the donation gets to be lined in the pocket of the executive and the people they work with without having any social. How do you react to that?
I think the difficulty is it's a bit of a, so as soon as you get into those discussions, you're kind of like, you're trying to say that things like administration and comms and leadership are not important in charities, when we know, when we run businesses, that those things are really critical. So good leadership is important, so why shouldn't you pay for it? Good processes and back-end systems are really important, why shouldn't you pay for them? So for me, like, I don't know, that conversation can be a bit of a distraction, but there is no getting away from the fact that there's been...
What does success looks like for you as a person? Success looks like for Third Sector Lab, and what does growth looks like for you, for the industry that you are playing?
I'm less focused on growth right now. That's about like people or money. They help you achieve things. What I'm quite excited about is like we're at a point where there's a few things that we want to achieve and I think are perfectly achievable, and particularly in Scotland being really aspirational about what tech and the charity sector can do together, and I think that is really exciting. I think Scotland's a small enough country where you can build those pieces of collaboration. You know, government's receptive to that work, funders are receptive to that work, but there's also just like a lot of interesting people doing amazing stuff right now in Scotland. I want Scotland to be the place in the world where there are more people from digital data and design backgrounds on charity boards than anywhere else.
Good to have you.
You too. Yeah.
So, how was your childhood like, and how do you think that's informed the kind of work you currently do now?
Cool. Just starting with the really small questions there. I like that. That's good. Thanks for that. How did my childhood influence where I am? Nobody's ever asked me that before. I don't know if I know the answer to that. It's probably worth saying that like I have no great founder story and don't come to any podcast that I've ever been on with any great preparation. So if I go on lots of tangents today, that'll give you an insight into that. I suppose as a child in school, I spent a lot of time staring out a window and thinking about other things, and probably that has lent itself quite nicely to starting a business and being curious about things. I don't think any of my teachers thought that much was going to happen as a result of that, but it probably stood me in good stead. I don't know if I've got any childhood influences that have affected where I am just now. I did I worked from a very young age, so I had like multiple paper rounds when I was like 10 or 11.
Impressive.
Used to do things like buy chewing gum with like collectible cards in the pound shop, and I'd buy like a packet of them and I would sell them door to door in the housing scheme that I grew up in. So I was always interested in like the concept of running a business and being entrepreneurial. I don't know if I knew what that would look like. Probably the manifestation of it was maybe like when I went to uni, I sold trainers from my bedroom online, very early internet.
Wow.
And that was, it's probably my first taste of like properly running a business. So I've kind of gone from selling trainers in a bedroom and selling stuff door to door to this now. So
That's impressive. You know, for you to be able to do that at that young early age. What did you think pushed you to start doing that at that young early age, when most people are not, concerned about or bothered about that? What's influenced your wanting to make a quick buck?
That's a nice way of putting it. I'm a fifer. Fifers are traditionally a bit tight and like money, so maybe that's part of it. Part of it is also just like I liked the concept of like running your business, even if it's quite small. So like the idea of it was always interesting to me. It was interesting to have a chat with someone today about like running your business and profit and how important it is. And I think there's often a bit of a kind of naive story where people are like, money's not important to me. And I think like, that's like a very privileged thing to say. And it's a very privileged thing. It often comes from people who have not often had to worry about money in their lives. So money's important up to a certain point of like, can you feed your family? Can you pay your rent or your mortgage? I think once you get to a certain point, it becomes less important. And I don't mean you need lots of materialistic things, but for me, I think it's quite naive to say that money's not relevant. But I think for me, it's never been the biggest driver. So yeah.
That's nice. I think I really love the way you balanced it, because you see people in both extremes. People who say money is not important, you don't need money, just do good things. And you also see the extreme end of capitalism, if I will dare to call it that, who think money is everything. I do love the way you balanced it. So from your experience running your company, what has there been a day that you felt, I can't do this anymore?
More than one day.
Tell me about it.
I suppose, the biggest transition for me has been the change from being a freelancer. So when I started out, I was a freelancer, and it was quite nice. It's quite flexible. Any kind of form of growth that involves other people involves really nice things, because you get to work as a team and you get to figure things out together. Also, managing people is a challenge. Being a boss is a challenge. I've probably been annoying to work for at points in time as well. So I think for me, that's the tricky thing. Like when you get it right, working with other people, that's the nicest bit about running a business. The bits that provide the hardest points are the bits where that doesn't go so well, and you're not on the same page about expectations and what you want from each other. I think, I don't know, like I feel really privileged in the fact that I get to work with nice charities and nice people, and I don't mean that in like a soppy kind of gushing way. It's like, we've not really had many clients who have been a pain in the arse. And most people I get to work with are very nice, they're very passionate about the work that they do. And I guess going back to your point about money, it's like most people I work with in the charity sector are not motivated by money, but there's still this kind of unhelpful narrative that people who work for charities shouldn't be paid anything, or it should be run by volunteers completely, or why is their money being spent on admin or overheads, and like just understanding the hard work that people put in the charity sector, and actually that salaries are often not that great for the work that's being done as part of it. So yeah, challenges are always people, but I might be the person in that equation that is the challenge rather than my staff.
Impressive, man. Impressive. People, tend to go towards both extreme. And let's talk a little bit about how people approach their digital strategy, their communication strategy, as not just any other business, but not for profit.
Yep.
And the kind of people you work with. What is one thing you see that most of them get wrong every single time, maybe before they start working with you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the biggest thing is leadership. So we've been doing quite a lot of work since 2016. I've been running the SCVO Digital Leadership Programme with Maddie Stark at SCVO. So for those who don't know, who are listening, it's the umbrella body for charities in Scotland. We've worked with about 300 charity chief execs and senior leaders. Wow. The organisations that make change are the ones that have a chief exec that gets it and a board that gets it, and they drive that change. They don't always need to be experts, but they need to be on the same page. They need to understand where they're going, direction of travel. More importantly, understanding the communities that they're serving, like how are people living their lives in 2025? What do the changes to how people live their lives mean for people? How do you deliver services? How do you provide better support to people? And the organisations that understand that are thriving and will continue to thrive in the future. The ones that think this is a thing for the board meeting in 6 months' time and maybe we'll get around to that are the ones that probably won't survive very much longer. I mean, I think like going off on a slight tangent, you look at the kind of workforce cuts around AI at the moment, Salesforce slashing 4,000 jobs. We're seeing these kind of big hits in the tech sector first because they're the most AI-focused, AI-first organisations. We're going to see it across others where admin, finance, anything where there's a repeat process, that's going to have a massive hit in organisations, and organisations that are not ready for that change and reskilling elements of the workforce so they can retain people in good positions are probably not going to exist, or they certainly won't exist to the same level that existed previously. So for me, good leadership and being bold and taking the right kind of risks is probably the most critical part of this, that people don't need to be experts. Your chief exec doesn't need to be an expert. But if this feels like a thing that they delegate to their IT company or a junior member of staff or someone else that isn't them at all, then I don't really know what hope they've got in 2026 and beyond that.
Wow. So then, with all of these things that you do currently, how do you balance, running a digital agency to working with people who set out to do business but they don't want to make money?
Okay. I mean, probably worth saying as well that like lots of charities and social enterprises are very, very good at making money. So,
oh, nice.
There's loads of social enterprises, particularly Scotland's got a really thriving social enterprise economy. Businesses that are not set out necessarily to be focused on profit, but that profit allows them to deliver more good in their community. So I think for me, that's probably an important part of the narrative. Your question, how do I balance the two things? I guess like for our work, we've always had kind of two quite distinct strands to our work. So on the agency side, we do things like website design development, we do digital transformation and consultancy work, a lot of classic things like you would see from any digital agency. And then on the programme side, we do things like our training programme, where we've trained 15,000 people since 2020 working in the charity sector on a range of digital data and design skills. We run a programme called Digital Trustees, where we try and get people from the tech sector onto charity boards. That's been a hugely successful programme. And for me, again, it's like that narrative about people giving back in the tech sector can sometimes, people have good intentions around that. What we're trying to do is change the conversations in the tech sector where actually you being involved in charities will benefit your career. It will benefit you as a startup. So if you're trying to run a startup and you end up on a charity board, suddenly you know how accounts work. Suddenly you tapped into a complete new network. Suddenly you know how proper leadership works. You know how accountability and decision making works. So for those people on the kind of early startup journey, being a charity trustee can be a hugely impactful thing that people do. So I guess going back to your original question, like how do we balance those things, is like we've always had the kind of paid work side of the business, whether we build a website or provide consultancy. But on the programme side, almost all of that work is free at the point of delivery for charities, and we'll partner with funder bodies like the Lottery or Robertson Trust to support those people who work in the charity sector to get the right skills and confidence they need around digital data and design.
Wow. Digital data and design, that's the part where you give back to the society. And the agency part of things is where you do that too, for businesses to make money.
Yeah, so worth saying, so on the agency side, we only work with third sector organisations. So we only work with charities, social enterprises, community groups. All of this only works because I have a very good team of people that are behind me. So like, good developers, designers, account managers, people leading on programmes. Like all of this happens because of all of those people. I happen to be the person that turns up on podcasts, but I don't do all the hard work.
That's nice. That's pretty neat. So there is something that's really that I want to understand. What kind of person or what kind of people decide that they are going to be running social enterprise? What kind of people do you see run these kind of things?
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive cross-section of society. Like, so it might be someone who's had personal experience of something, like maybe they lost a loved one, a health condition, and they didn't get the right support they needed at the right time, and they set up a charity specifically for that health condition to support other people. There's a lot of kind of legacy charities set up, which can be really impactful. Some charities might be into the tens of millions of pounds turnover because they've been existing for a while. They provide big social care contracts that keep society running. In Scotland, there's loads of thriving social enterprises like CEIS, I think, might still be the biggest social enterprise in Europe, based in Glasgow. Really well known ones, things like Bike for Good, Bike for Refugees, like really grassroots organisations, but that serve a really clear purpose. In terms of the kind of people, like we've worked with like a huge range of people who have come from the business sector, who want to do something more interesting with their lives and set up a social enterprise. People who are just trying to do the right thing in their community and have a passion about something. And I think that's probably where our work's quite different, is like we work with quite big charities on things like website design, development work, and where those kind of budgets allow for that, but also we work with quite small community groups and deliver kind of one-to-one training with them and try and support them. And that's the bit that I would never change about the work that I do, is like being able to see that kind of full spectrum of third sector and the impact that those organisations have. But I mean, it's people doing a lot of work, often for free, and being very passionate about the work that they deliver, and often being quite undervalued in that work, whether that's through the pay or whether it's the kind of accolades they get for the impact that they have in their communities.
Well, and why do you think people are, underpaid, undervalued for the immense work that they do? Sometimes the kind of work they do are the work nobody wants to do, or nobody's paying attention to.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. Yeah.
Why do you think there is a disparity in the reward?
Yep. Yeah. So I mean, I've done loads of work with social care charities over the years. Lots of stuff around like online campaigns. How do we get a broader cross section of society to work in a frontline social care job? The real answer is frontline social care jobs pay largely quite badly, and it's one of the hardest jobs anyone can do. And that is not the responsibility of charities. That's the responsibility of like what is important to us in society, how much our government's paying or local authorities paying in contracts to those organisations to deliver that really vital, really difficult work. So for me, that's the big thing, is like a reassessment of what is important. I know we're getting in a big like existential political debate here, but if as a society we value that work so little, that we pay so little for it to be delivered to some of the most vulnerable people in our communities, then how do we attract the right people to do those kind of jobs? So yeah, I don't know if that answered your actual question there, or if I just went off on a rant about people in social care not getting paid enough.
It seems to me, as an outsider in this sector, that the people who do these important jobs are underpaid, from what you've said, and they are undervalued, they are under-recognized. Why do you think it's so?
Yeah, so apart from the rant I just went on about social care there and people being underpaid, I guess there's the simple fact that most charities rely on public donations, a small amount of government funding, and a lot of volunteers who are propping that up, and actually paying salaries that are equivalent to the private sector is very, very difficult. And I think this is probably, for me, the biggest challenge around digital data and design, and one of the big things that drives our work is you could be a service designer in one of the banks out there in Glasgow, and you could get paid the same salary as probably the average charity chief executive in Scotland. Now, you've got an important job as a service designer, but you probably don't manage a team. You probably are not responsible for the safety of people's lives, and your impact is probably nowhere near the same. And that's not being disparaging to it. I'm just plucking a service designer. That could be a web developer or a data analyst or a million other jobs in tech that pay probably at the level of a chief exec in a charity. And so that's been one of the drivers for our work, is how do you support third sector organisations to get more confident with digital data and design, so that the sector can reflect the skills that are needed in 2025 without necessarily having to be able to afford those people in those jobs, because the reality is for lots of charities they'll never be able to afford those people. So I guess going back to my point earlier is like, as a society, what do we actually value, and what's the most important thing, and where does that money flow, and do we value the work that charities do? And the money says we don't as much as we should. And I wish people in the charity sector were paid more than they were at the moment. If you have a person listening to this podcast who can make a considerable donation to lots of charities and bolster wages, that'd be good.
Okay, so
if
you are listening to this podcast and you are in a position to be able to donate to whatever charity, it will go a long way. And which brings me to the next question. There are some people who think that some charities just take the money to pay their staff. They don't get to really do anything. A large portion of the donation gets to the to be lined in the pocket of the executive and the people they work with without having any social impact. How do you react to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficulty is it's a bit of a... So as soon as you get into those discussions, you're kind of like, you're trying to say that things like administration and comms and leadership are not important in charities, when we know, when we run businesses, that those things are really critical. So good leadership is important, so why shouldn't you pay for it? Good processes and back-end systems are really important, why shouldn't you pay for them? So for me, like, I don't know, that conversation can be a bit of a distraction, but there is no getting away from the fact that there's been enough controversies in the charity sector over the last 5 years or so, some of them very, very real, that have alarmed the public. And there's a kind of recouping of public confidence in the charity sector that it's getting there, but it's actually kind of, for a while was at a bit of an all-time low where people did not trust charities. But that was a reflection of one or two stories that would end up in mainstream newspapers and didn't reflect the 99.9% of the charities that are out there operating right now. But I would say, the charity sector reflects society in the same way that the business sector does, or the public sector. And if I was to look in a local authority council office, how many staff in there would be doing something that was unscrupulous? How many businesses in Glasgow are set up and don't pay tax? And every sector has its own problems. I don't think it's something particularly unique to the charity sector. But for me, the idea that no money at all should be spent on leadership or the other things that make good organisations function feels a bit silly. And the more that we get that stuff right, the more that you can have impact with the money that you're donating. And every charity wants, lots of charities want to be set up to not exist. So, Cancer Research UK does not want to exist. It wants to be a charity that provides research and provides cures. Lots of charities are set up to, at some point, not exist. Now, that concept is quite alien in the business sector, because the idea that you'd be like, I'm going to set myself up to not exist would be quite ridiculous. But so those kind of concepts of why you exist, how you exist, the impact you're making and what is important are quite different. And I think putting those same measures of how you run a corporate entity versus how you run a charity, they're not the same thing. But going back to the fundamentals of running a business are not that different from the fundamentals of running a charity. And without them, the whole thing falls apart.
I think you've brought a very, very strong defense from anybody who have this kind of thought that if I donate, it just goes to, overhead without really, really helping people.
Yeah.
Because from what I have also learned from you now, for just like any other business, the front office has to be there for the business to run effectively. The executive has to be there for the things to run effectively. So, and if there has been cases of one or two they've not played by the book, it shouldn't reflect on the whole of the sector. It's just a one or two case scenario. While we have gazillion of people who are doing the right thing, you've really put a very strong defense forward, which when you say it now, it makes sense to me now. To be honest, it does make sense now. Saying that one or two persons cannot represent. Maybe we have 500 charities and one or two are bad. For me, I think that's more than enough. That's more than, if that's about 99.9% are still good. I think for me, it's a pass mark. So the next thing I want to, probably it can still take us back to what we are talking about is this. Do you have any other opinion that people have on this sector that you think it is completely wrong, and because you are an insider, that's completely wrong and this is the right thing? The first example is the fact that some people think when I donate £1, 90% of it goes to overhead, just 10p goes to making social impact. That's one. And you brought a very, very strong defense to this, to these thoughts that lingers in people's mind. Are there any thoughts like that? Do you have anything like that people think about the thought sector? I think, I don't know if this is something you want in your podcast or not, but anyway, I think civil society is in a bit of a precarious position at the moment where
there's a government that's quite hostile to campaigning groups, and sometimes a bit of a fear about what you should or shouldn't say and what that will result in. So I'm not going to get into like massive details of what that is and what it isn't, but I think for me that's a very slippery slope, and that's a dangerous place as a society. And again, it goes back to like, what do we value, what do we think is important? Like, if we want open dialogue and discussion, and we want people to be able to campaign freely and openly, whether they're charities or individuals, what does that look like? Are you going to be arrested for doing that? Who decides when you get arrested? When do the goalposts change? So that for me is probably like a really, really big concern, and a danger again of like an undervaluing of the charity sector's role in fighting for injustices. And if you don't value that as a society, well, where do we end up? And that's for me quite a scary proposition over the coming years, where we're seeing a more antagonistic approach to campaigning and protesting. And what does that, like, what is important to us as a society? And I think we need to be really clear about that.
This reminds me of a saying that's saying about free speech. I think it's one dictator or an authoritarian that says that there is free speech, but I can't guarantee you what happens after your free speech. You may not be free after the free speech. You know, like the right for people to be able to campaign what they feel is. Okay. So, what advice would you have for somebody who is thinking of coming into this sector newly? Today I'm asking you, Ross, I'm thinking of getting into this sector. What advice would you have for me?
God, that's a good question. So I guess it depends at what point you're trying to get into the sector. So one of the things I would always say is, like, people have good intentions of setting up charities, but there's a very high chance that someone is doing that thing that you're passionate about already. And how do you work with them to accomplish that? And I think it's one of the things we saw during the pandemic is lots of people in the tech sector, great intentions, lots of stuff they wanted to do for society, but it's like leaping to the tech solution first without thinking, oh, there's a charity in my community that already does that thing. They've been doing it for 40 years. What's their experience? What's their intelligence? How do I work with them to deliver that solution? So that for me is one of the big things, particularly if a lot of the listeners of this podcast are going to be people working in tech startup land, is actually thinking your first conversation might be people in civil society. If you're working in a tech for good startup, how do you have those conversations with people in charities where they've done a lot of that groundwork that you're trying to do? They hold a lot of the data, they can open a lot of the doors for you. But what we need to see is reciprocal partnerships in that kind of startup space where civil society is working effectively with tech startups, and some of that money is also flowing back into civil society as well. So going off on a slight tangent about tech for good stuff, but yeah, assuming that someone is already doing the thing and thinking about how you'll work with them, I think is really important. There's lots of good careers in the charity sector that I think we'll see lots more careers in digital data and design in the charity sector as charities change and evolve. And again, it goes back to your question about, like, you know, if some of the money that you donate doesn't go into future-proofing charities and thinking about how we better deliver services and how we use digital to deliver those things, well, your money actually becomes more and more inefficient throughout time. So if we know that AI can deliver an efficiency, that I can reduce an admin overhead, and actually your pound goes further than it did 6 months ago, that's a really positive thing. If nobody is working on that AI solution that's going to reduce that overhead in that charity, then your pound becomes more and more inefficient as the years go on. So I think for me, there's just so many opportunities for the tech sector to collaborate, whether it's a kind of formal paid role, whether it's a partnership, whether it's through programs like Digital Trustees Programme, but encouraging more people in that tech startup space to get involved in charities and thinking about what are the local kind of ways that you can get involved, what are the meetups that are happening, what are the ways that you can start some of those conversations. Throughout the UK, so we run a thing called Tech for Good Scotland, which is a kind of gathering of people in that space in Scotland. There's equivalents across the UK, so there's a kind of UK Tech for Good organisers network. In most communities and most cities in the country, there'll be some kind of gathering of people, whether it's small or whether it's quite big, focused on this kind of work. So trying to bring together collaboration, I think, is really key. We've seen a lot of that through Tech for Good Scotland. You know, like one of our last speakers, came from Edinburgh University, someone else from Scottish Government. We had people in tech startups, people in charity sector, people working in kind of small community groups, doing really interesting stuff with technology.
So I still want to I want us to take a quick detour back to probably 10 years ago,
Yeah.
or a moment before you started
Yeah.
this.
You're being kind to my age here. More than 10 years, but thanks for that. Okay.
What would you whisper to the younger Ross?
Oh my God. Gosh. I guess like don't stress out over things that you don't have control over. I think it's probably a big thing. I don't know if there'll be any like massive sage kind of business advice that I would give my younger self, but try not to be stressed over those kind of things that you don't have control over. That's a really good question, isn't it? I suppose not being afraid of growth. So for a while I was like, I just like working for myself. It's easy. I control what I do. It's quite nice. But actually one of the nicest things I've found is like as we've grown as an organisation and we have more staff, I get to work with really amazing people, and real change happens more quickly because those people are collaborating and we're working with each other. And that for me has probably been like one of the biggest joys in what I do, is like whether it's partners that I work with or whether it's my staff team, that's the bit that excites me and kind of gets me out of bed. And I kind of wish I'd taken that leap a little bit earlier, that kind of growth journey. And not, I think there's a danger like the growth journey, and particularly a kind of startup space, it's like growth for the sake of growth, or often growth because someone just wants to sell their company, let's be honest. But actually, how do you create growth to actually achieve the things that you want to achieve and actually work with good people? And you can't do that without growth because you don't have the money to pay those people.
Oh my goodness, that's right. So, Ross, imagine we are sitting here 10 years from now.
Okay, yeah.
What does success looks like for you as a person? What does success looks like for your company, the Third Lab, the Third Sector Lab? And what does growth looks like for you, for the industry that you are playing in?
Yeah, so I mean, so even though I just kind of went off on one about growth, like I'm less focused on growth right now that's about like people or money. They help you achieve things. What I'm quite excited about is like we're at a point where there's a few things that we want to achieve and I think are perfectly achievable, and particularly in Scotland being really aspirational about what tech and the charity sector can do together. And I think that is really exciting. I think Scotland's a small enough country where you can build those pieces of collaboration. Government's receptive to that work, funders are receptive to that work, but there's also just like a lot of interesting people doing amazing stuff right now in Scotland. I want to aspire for Scotland to be the leading nation in the world, where it's a very boring aspiration, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I want Scotland to be the place in the world where there are more people from digital data and design backgrounds on charity boards than anywhere else. And through the digital leadership work that I've done, the charities that make change quickly and effectively are the ones that have trustees that get this stuff, governance that is given oversight from a board that can make change effectively and safely as well. So that for me is like one of the big aspirations. Growth would look like Scotland is leading the world in that space. On the training side that I mentioned before, like, as I said, like charity salaries do not always pay enough to buy a data analyst or get the salary of a data analyst or a service designer or a high level developer. And actually what I would love is how do we increase skills and confidence in the sector so that a lot of those kind of core skills are in the sector itself and stay there. So, we've trained 15,000 people since 2020. I would love to grow those numbers. So growth for me would be we have really strongly confident teams of people working in charities and community groups and social enterprises in Scotland. And another aspiration is like Scotland leads the way in that Scotland becomes the most digitally confident civil society. And Third Sector Lab's got a role to play in that, but there's other organisations like SCVO and CAST, things like Scottish AI Alliance doing amazing work in that space. But how do we be aspirational as a country? And I would love to think about Third Sector Lab having a role to play in that. But for me, it's not just like let's train more people or let's get some people on boards. It's like, what does that actually look like as an end point? And that's the bit for me that's quite exciting.
So Ross, what's the problem you are obsessed about solving right now?
That's a really good question. I think for me, like the stuff around AI at the moment is both incredibly exciting and utterly terrifying, and I think anyone that says otherwise is pretty naive, to be perfectly honest. Like, we're going to, this chief exec of Perplexity, I think it was Perplexity or Claude maybe, the other day came out with a statement of like, we need to raise tax levels specifically for AI firms, probably in the States, probably in Europe as well, because the changes they make in the next 5 years are going to have the biggest impact, not just in society as a whole, but taxation. So if people lose jobs, so if you look at Salesforce as an example, sacking 4,000 people, that is 45% of their support team, because 50% of interactions are now on AI. So on the one hand, that's exciting for them as a company, it's exciting for their shareholders. It's not very exciting for those 4,000 people. And for those 4,000 people, they're no longer paying levels of tax back into society that help you run the NHS or a police force or the social care services that we mentioned before. And that's a huge challenge for society. So for me, the thing that I find both equally exciting and terrifying is like, what is the charity sector's response to AI and how does it embrace it? And lots of charities at the moment have kind of really pulled back because they're like, this is scary for our workforce. We also have considerations around like data and safety, which some of them are very real. What I would love is, how do charities take those kind of small experiments with AI and look at starting small? So the small thing might be, we spend 14 hours a week just doing minute taking on meetings that we have one-to-one with staff. How do we take that 14 hours and we get it down to an hour across our organisation? Or we spend, every time we try and have a meeting with external partners, we're back and forward 17 emails. Could the AI just look at all of our diaries and tell us, here's the 3 times that you're all actually free, and then we book it in based on that, and we just saved 17 emails back and forward in how much time. So that ability to drive efficiency initially, that then allows you to focus on service delivery and really delivering that impact. So going back to your point of like, where does that pound that I give as a donation go? How do we maximise where that pound goes? And the biggest thing that I would love is like, rather than looking at this as like the efficiencies of sacking staff because AI has come in, is how does someone in an admin role that is now going to be delivered 45% by AI, well, the exciting thing about that is it's freed up that person's time. Could they be retrained to do basic data analysis? Is there another role in the organisation that they might be more passionate about? And what I know from like frontline staff is like, if you're a counsellor working with young people and 10% of your working week is filling out forms, and an AI gives you back that time, that's 10% more counselling time for those young people in that school that you're working in. So that for me is like the terrifying thing of like, the very shape of society is going to change massively, but really exciting because it means that arguably we can deliver much, much more impact with the work that we're doing.
What's one story that people get wrong about you, and what's the true story?
I don't know if anyone's got any stories about me. Maybe they're like, I don't know. Does anyone that? I think the thing I said before, because I was speaking to a friend about like coming on this podcast, and they were like, they named someone else in the kind of startup scene in Scotland, and were like, every time I see him, he's really impressive, and he has this like very well crafted narrative about himself, and I'm like, I don't have any kind of crafted narrative about myself, so I don't know, like, I guess I've always tried to like let the work talk for itself rather than there being any kind of grand narrative about me per se. So I don't know. Maybe there is like a dark story that someone's got about me that I don't know about, and I need to kind of counteract it. I'm not sure.
My goodness.
But yeah, no, I don't know if there is one. I don't know.
So one of the questions that we ask here is, we call the name of this podcast The Blueprint.
Yep.
It's to give people who want to go into this sector.
Yep.
A blueprint of how they can, contribute to the society, make the world a better place. How do you think somebody should approach this? Just to preempt you, to let you know, I really, really paid attention to what you were saying. The first part is try to look for people who are doing what you are doing, and for people who want to start from scratch, unless it's nobody's in the area you want to do. How do you go about it? I want you to touch on the two.
Yeah, so I think probably it's not that different from classic startup stuff. Is like the big question. So if I was an investor in your startup, the big question I would ask is like, are you solving an actual problem here? Do you just want my money because you're going to do the same thing that 17 other people do, and maybe there is enough market share that you can do that, but why are you doing it any differently? And I think for me, it's like being able to understand society and communities and users and using that as your starting point. And what we've seen a lot in the kind of tech for good space is people with great intentions and probably very technically gifted. What they've not started with is like an actual user need, which is the starting point of any good business or any good charity. And if that's not there, then your big question is, well, why are you doing this thing in the first place? Now, it might be that you're a great developer or data analyst and you can support someone in their journey, but that starting point of like, is there a user need for this thing you're about to do? Now, we see this less and less, but like for a while, that kind of great proliferation of people thinking that tech for good was like, I'm going to design yet another app that will last all of about 2 hours on someone's device before they delete it, is like, you know, that is kind of dead and buried in the water. But that was as a result of people not starting with user needs. They were like, I can make an app. I'm going to make an app for this really half-arsed, not very well thought out idea. And if we can go back to user needs, then, you know, that's the thing where we deliver it. You know, I was talking about like really simple, small charities in Glasgow, like things like Bike for Refugees. Like they have a very simple premise, like they provide bikes for refugees. That's it. That's all they do. They're not trying to overcomplicate things. And that for me, I think they're the most interesting types of community groups and charities are the ones that have a really strong focus. So people like Street Soccer Scotland, like supporting people experiencing homelessness through the medium of running football sessions and things like the Homelessness World Cup. Like real clarity about what they're doing, who it's for, solving a user need, doing it in a way that actually genuinely engages with people. So they for me are always the kind of really interesting organisations, and I think if you can find that, then you're onto something really impressive. But as you said, like that starting point should be the assumption that I'm going to need to partner with other people to make this thing happen. Now, it might be that you've seen a really unique use case of technology and there's a charity who works with that exact audience, but they're not delivering that use case. Well, there's an amazing partnership ready to be born right there. Speaking to that charity in purely a consultative way is not a very effective way of making these things happen. So again, it's like balancing that relationship up, where I think a lot of startups in that tech for good space could be accelerating impact and arguably accelerating investment if they partnered with a civil society organisation who already understands that space. And they would get over a lot of those initial hurdles of figuring things out, understanding what people want and need, because they can partner with someone who's been doing that for decades and knows it inside out. So that for me is like the big value, and particularly I think for people listening to a Blueprint podcast, is like, if you're a startup, you're interested in tech for good, who's the person in a charity or a small community group or a social enterprise who's trying to tackle this thing but maybe doesn't have the technology element of it right? Maybe there's a really incredible partnership being ready to be made there.
Okay. So what if I have a tech idea, I'm a very, very good developer, which I'm not.
Join the club.
And, I have an idea, I try to partner with somebody and they are not open to that. What do you advise me to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think there's always an assumption that charities want the stuff as well, right? So the other thing is like, how would I put this and not be really, really rude? There's a lot of bad startups. There's a lot of like terrible tech startups that someone in the very first pitch meeting should have said, that's a crap idea and you should not pursue this any further. And I kind of wish that while it's nice that there's a nurturing environment and there's lots of funding and we're all very happy clappy about stuff, there equally sometimes needs to come a point in that journey where people are told that their idea is very, very bad. So sometimes a charity doesn't want to partner with a tech startup because the idea is fundamentally flawed from the get-go. And sometimes that is okay that people know that and have those conversations. I've seen lots of amazing tech startups in Scotland. I've also seen lots that have kind of floundered for years because nobody's just told them that the thing they have come up with is not very good. So there's maybe, I don't know what the solution to that is. There's maybe it needs to be both a nurturing and supporting environment, but also an environment that says that idea cannot work because of X, Y, and Z. And sometimes, had a civil society organisation been involved in those conversations early on, it would have been really, really obvious why that idea couldn't have worked. And sometimes it's not technical. Sometimes it's just like, maybe the user group you're trying to reach 40% of them don't have a smartphone, or maybe 45% of them are on a pay-as-you-go data plan and cannot possibly use that thing that you want them to use. So that level of intelligence and insight that you will get through speaking to people who have lived experience, or people who have been running an organisation working in that space for years, that know that you get is often part of that founder's journey. That's the bit where people pivot. Some of the most successful companies in the world did not start out, Samsung started out as a noodle shop. Right? Samsung do not sell a lot of noodles at the moment. I think I read a thing the other day that Samsung is something like 20% of South Korea's entire economy. If they had continued to sell noodles, they probably would not be 20% of South Korea's economy. So sometimes being told no is okay, and sometimes being told no is the most important part of that founder journey and that startup process.
I have seen some couple of startups in this ecosystem for a couple of few years, still trying to, even probably I have one customer. Maybe after 2-3 year, 2 year, one customer.
Yep.
And it seems, just like you said, we have a very, very nurturing environment. And permit me to say this, please forgive me. It's not being. I'm not being racist, but I have noticed that it is British culture to be very, very polite, up onto the point of your own detriment.
Yep.
Just like you said, somebody should have told you from the get-go that this idea. Somebody should have said, I have been working in this sector for the past 15 years, 10 years. This idea is not going to work, and these are the reasons.
Yep, totally.
Or sometimes somebody might have a very, very good idea, but they are not the right person to run the idea.
Yep.
They don't have the network, they don't have the skills, they are the wrong person for the idea. Then, so I'm trying to see, how do we now balance it to the point where, we've had stories of people who started something and they've flown that for a very long time. Then they later became something great. Then they will now come back to the people that told them that your idea was rubbish. I guess that's why people are very, very careful into saying, telling you the truth to your face. They listen to your pitch, they say, okay, that's nice. And it doesn't go anywhere. So how do you think one should be able to balance this?
That's a really good question. I think, let's go back to the very first point you made there about are the structures of this kind of racist? I think you're kind of spot on. So if you look at there's organisations like Decamai in Glasgow that have been spending a lot of time campaigning for funding and ecosystems to be open to a much wider range of people. And I think for me, it's about if everything is set up that it only favours white middle class people who understand how the systems work and understand the types of conversations you have in those spaces to get the money, then that system is racist. And it's not just racist, it's does it work for people who are neurodivergent? Does it work for people with disabilities who can't come to that meetup that you have on a Thursday evening? So those very structures of how funding is allocated and how we make decisions around startups in this country, there needs to be thought put into them being much, much more inclusive, and that might just come down to sometimes something as simple as the language that is used. I also think there's a danger of are we dangerously trying to transplant a kind of San Francisco based ecosystem to a country that is not California? And what does that look like, and what does that mean? So I think there's loads of big questions that need to be had that move away from it just feeling like everything is just great and everything is just amazing, because it can be, because 9 out of 10 startup ideas are going to flop, and that's okay. That's part of the journey, it's part of the conversation. But if nobody ever tells you that, and you're ploughing it away, I think 3 years later, and you have one client, how long do you keep going with that? How long do people keep ploughing money into the business? I think there's also a big thing of the kind of narrative around startups where the most important thing is your exit plan. So the most important thing is, how much money will I get for this in 5 years, and when do I leave and retire when I'm in my 40s? When actually we should be thinking about, is this sustainable? Do I have any actual clients? Is there a user need for this? What does the marketplace look at the moment? And a lot of those kind of big hard questions are not always being asked of startups. And actually, I would love to see more startups operating probably the same way that the cafe downstairs is. Like, the cafe downstairs can't work as a concept. It can't work as a thing that we will promise in 5 years' time. They have to sell some coffees and sandwiches or they don't exist. And actually having more startups that are focused on serving a real user need here and now, and actually building a business that is sustainable rather than some kind of future promise, and the whole thing being based around getting lots of funding and getting lots of initial investment with no actual user base. Seems kind of silly, seems like it's smoke and mirrors. So there's always a balance to be struck. So, you know, we need to invest in things that are ideas that we don't even know what this business is going to look like in 5 years' time, because we're building something for a world that we don't even know what that world is going to look like. But most startup ideas are not in that space yet. And I think, yeah, those hard, difficult conversations are an important part of the journey. I think you asked another part of that question there, and I went off in a bit of a rant.
My question was, how do we balance these two? For somebody building something for the next 5 years, and them being practical as the coffee shop downstairs, to be able to show somebody is using this product and it's solving a real problem. How do we balance it?
Yeah, and I think, like, so you made a point earlier about, like, you might have someone who's got, like, so you might have a developer who's very technically able, but they can't market the solution. They can't go and pitch to a bunch of investors. They can't have that conversation with that charity who's going to help them do a lot of that groundwork and speak to people who are going to actually use this thing that they're trying to build. So the team that you build around you is the most critical part of it. The work that I do, like, I'm lucky enough to have a very, very good staff team who are passionate about the work that they do and execute it very well. Without that, it all just falls apart. You're just one person trying to achieve something probably quite big, and you're never going to be capable of doing that on your own. Now, that doesn't always have to be staff. It might be other people who want to found a business like you, and you come together to collaborate. It could be that you bring in freelancers, but that idea that you can do this alone is not going to work. And again, this is where ecosystems are important. Things like this podcast are important, because it's about how do I connect with other people that are going to help me on that journey. And that isn't always about money. It's about kind of skills and connections. So yeah, people are a big part of that answer.
People, and money. Money. Resources and resourcefulness one needs to bring together to make any business or any endeavor work. What's one thing, this is the last question we usually ask, is what are the 5 advice that you would give to anyone? I've asked it in previously, but what are the 5 steps that anyone who is coming into this sector should think about? You can take your time.
No, that's okay. That's okay. So when you say this sector, do you mean startups in general, or do you mean the charity sector, or
startups,
tech for good, or
startup and the charity space?
Okay, cool.
Because it seems there are some similarities between the two of them. One is focused mainly on profit, and the other is focused on profit and on social impact and profit. Because again, you still need to make some money to keep the door open.
Yeah, totally. I think, you know, the big one, and I've said it already, is like starting with user needs. So if you're interested,
start with user needs,
and that, I mean, that feels like a very like technical term, but really what we're thinking about is if you have an idea for a startup, and particularly if you're in that tech for good space, and you don't understand the people who are going to use the thing you're trying to build, that's a very silly place to start. Now, you might have a great idea, and all it is at the moment is an idea. And having that initial conversation with the organisation or the community group or the campaigner that's been working in that space for the last 2 decades will be enough for you to figure out whether that idea has some legs. So again, going back to like probably point 2 would be comfortable with being told no. I think it's really important. So have an early idea, small tests of change. You've got some users in mind. You put an early prototype in front of those users. Is that actually going to work? So like what is the user testing around this? There's a lot of stuff that I've seen in the tech for good space is like never even seems to have got to that point of like we are testing an actual product with some actual real people. And that could be a really lo-fi version of that product, but getting to that point really, really early. Thinking about who's going to open up the doors for the money that's going to support it. Who are the conversations that you're going to have with? What does that look like? Who do you need to partner in with? And I think there needs to be, I would argue in Scotland, a wee bit more transparency about tech startup funding. So in the charity sector, there's a thing called 360 Giving, where most of the major funders publish openly data around their giving. So you can go in 360 Giving and you can see openly and transparently where money has gone, where funders have given the money, what it's been for, what the amounts are, the dates that it was given. I would love to see more of that transparency in the tech sector in Scotland and the business sector in Scotland. And I guess part of that transparency is also like when we think about, going back to that point we made about diversity of decision making and like who is actually getting the money. I would love that to be openly and transparently published. Now, a lot of that stuff is probably, you could get it through an FOI request and you could see it, but I think by default having open comms around decision making becomes a really powerful thing, because people can see, well, actually there was a funder around, and actually here were the 5 things that got the money. That gives me a pretty good understanding of the next time I go for funding elsewhere, here's the types of things that people are willing to fund in that landscape right now. Or that startup worked and it got money because it was a team that involved these 6 types of people. I've got 2 people, but I actually need to go and find these 4 types of people. And so that openness and transparency of where that money is flowing is a really critical part of people being able to have effective startups. If we don't have that, it's really difficult for people to know. It's also really difficult to scrutinise, like, who's getting the money. Is it fair? Is it transparent? Is it biased? And that for me is really important. I think that was maybe 4. I don't know if I've got a 5th one. I think like just choose something that you're passionate about, that you actually care about. Like most people who work in the tech for good space, even if there was no people who someone should have told them no a while ago, most people are passionate about it. They're doing it because they care about something.
Really care about it.
How do you harness that thing that you care about and do something about it? Now, what you might do about it is you might go and volunteer. You might sit on a charity board. You might apply for a job with a charity. It doesn't always need to be, I have a startup idea and that is the thing that I am going to be completely focused on, because your good idea might morph into different ways of working with that group that you're hoping to work with. I would love to see, one of the things I would love to see is, I've spoken a lot about like the kind of like official ways that you could be doing stuff, i.e. go and work with a charity, go and work with a community group. I would love to see more people from those groups having ownership of technology, and more people from who are going to be the recipients of that technology having a say in that stuff, and maybe co-ownership over that stuff, whether that's things like cooperative models or employee ownership, whatever that kind of looks like, but actually less people having things done to them and more people in the communities that we're trying to support having a say and shape and potentially ownership of what those technology solutions look like as well. And that's the thing in Glasgow. It's like, wouldn't it be great if we had tech startups that were creating jobs in those communities, rather than like tech jobs being created and going to the same middle class people? Wouldn't it be nice if more communities had more access to high paid jobs and more people were paying higher rates of tax because they got paid more? Wouldn't that be a nice place to be?
That's nice. Do you have any question for me?
Oh, that's good. Do you know what? I'm really interested. Like, what motivated you to set up this podcast in the first place? Like, what do you want to see it do? What are the kind of conversations you want to have?
I am a curious person.
Okay.
And
it's good to be nosy.
Yeah, nosy. And I found one of the things that helped me when I came to this country about 3-4 years ago was having conversations like this, having coffees, going to, this place wasn't there then. Immediately after COVID, the first event that Nick was organizing, I usually go there, meet people, see what is going on in the environment, in the community. And sometimes I get lucky to have coffee with people to see the kind of problem they are solving. So it's kind of gave me an insight into how the ecosystem work. Either for tech, both for tech and the non-tech part of the business in Glasgow. So I just thought, what if if somebody else could be a fly on the wall to listen to this conversation? What would it do to them? If I can record the conversation and be able to play it back in my head, how will it feel? So it's a very, very selfish reason that I'm.
No, I love it. I like it. That's amazing. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, and glad that, like, for me, like, when we do quite a lot of work UK wide. So things like we sponsor like charity camp down in Birmingham and do quite a bit of work in London. And like most other parts of the UK are jealous of Glasgow because it has a really thriving tech ecosystem. You could go out pretty much any night of the week and speak to people doing really interesting things. There's no shortage of interesting ways to connect with people doing amazing work in Glasgow, and I think like it's in a really healthy place. So a lot of the stuff where I'm like challenging things about like transparency of money or like more people being told no, I think it's because like the tech ecosystem's in a healthy place where it can cope with that kind of stuff and those kind of conversations now, that we've hopefully moved beyond it just feeling like everything's just wonderful and we have a big happy clappy space. I like, there's actually like the kind of nights like fuck up nights that they have in Social Hub. I don't know if you've been to those, but it's like people talking about things that went really badly, and I think that's important.
Yeah, I saw it in the mail, but I've never had it.
Yeah, so that concept of just like in Scotland being comfortable talking about the stuff that didn't work well as the stuff that worked is really important as part of these conversations. So yeah, I think it's really cool what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Ross. Oh, thank you.
Cool.